with Indigenous Communities by Whitley. The deplorable treatment of Indigenous people in Canada has caused legitimate and intergenerational mistrust of those who have oppressed and maltreated them. Not exempt from this disgrace in Canada's history has been the research conducted on, not with, Indigenous peoples. Ethics were not considered in much of the prior research, and the results often perpetuated the racist practices against these people. One such example is in Port Alberni, BC, where I reside, which is on the traditional territory of the T-Shop First Nation. The Alberni Indian Residential School was one of the last standing in Canada, operating from 1892 to 1973, and was torn down by former students in 2009. Throughout the years, there were various counts of physical and sexual abuse and maltreatment, as well as the theft of culture, language, and traditions. The school curriculum focused on farming for the boys and home economics such as cooking, baking, and canning for the girls, which was contradictory to the experiments being performed in this setting, and likely all the exposure to the healthy, delicious food heightened the brutality of the experiments for the subjects. In 2013, Canadian media shared stories of historical research done on Indigenous people in Alberni Indian Residential School and others across Canada, related to nutrition, or more, the absolute void of it. Historical food researcher Ian Mosby from the University of Guelph uncovered that between 1942 and 1952, nutritional experts conducted studies by denying food and healthcare treatment in order to study the effects of malnutrition. Early investigations found that the diets of children were lacking vitamins A, B, and C, and iodine because they were not being provided with enough foods like milk, fruit, vegetable, eggs, cheese, and iodized salt. But instead of improving the quality of the diet in the school, as were the urgings of First Nation leaders to the researchers, it was decided to conduct experiments on their already deprived children, who were continually malnourished for the years, for the sake of science. The children were also denied dental treatment to study the impact. The students were innocent children that had already been victimized by being yanked from their parents' care, and the Canadian government, through this research, re-victimized them. And to add insult to injury, the students were made to write letters of thanks to the researchers at the end of their work. This was just one example of research that was bold-faced racism against Indigenous people. The intentions of the experiment were to serve the political and professional interests of the colonial regime at the expense of Indigenous children's well-being, said Mosby. The experiments join a host of unethical scientific research on Indigenous people in Canada and shows a call for an Indigenous approach to ethical research. This example shows why a paradigm shift from the traditional maltreatment in research on Indigenous people to a new collaborative approach is needed as part of the logical progression towards reconciliation and building of relationships rich in the culture, traditions, and knowledge of the historical people of Canada. Moving forward, we must consider how contemporary research methodologies such as participatory action research and feminist research may be applied to research with Indigenous populations in the social sciences. Participatory action research's main underpinning is that the population being researched are active participants who provide meaningful knowledge in identifying local problems and can counteract traditional exploitative research by working with, not on, the participants. Feminist methodology is a broad concept, with the underlying concept being to decenter white males as the primary knowledge holders, which relates to reconciliation in Canada. When looking at intersectionality, feminist research deals with giving power to the marginalized, which is relevant to the participatory action research and definitely to Indigenous research. An example of how these concepts can look in practice is evident at the delegated Indigenous agency I am employed at. They are at the action phase of their research. While it was not explicitly stated to be, what they did was quite similar to the underpinnings of PAR and feminist research methodologies. The research problem was that there are no or very few on-reserve foster families in remote communities, and as such, many children and youth are being taken away from their traditional territories and placed in urban centers with non-Indigenous care providers. Indigenous and settler social workers went into the communities to talk with the people, which was difficult to do as there was such a lack of trust for social workers. What did help in the beginning was that some of the social workers were members of their nations, and they were able to find key informants who were providing care within the communities. From building trust with these informants, they were able to connect with other Indigenous people and form conversations about the issues, meanwhile moving towards a solution. They found out that one of the main themes of the lack of foster homes was fear of the system that traditionally oppressed them. The locals worried if they signed up to be the foster care families, they were in a way working with the enemy, and they also thought there was a lack of available supports. It was also found in these communities there were natural supports who parents, youth, and caregivers gravitated towards, which they happened in a natural way. Through these findings, the key informants, their networks, and the agency was able to roll out their new care model for remote reserves. What they have done is a new model to reflect traditional family networks. They are beginning to formulate hub homes, who are going to be the local community supports for other families to get involved in fostering. These hub homes will be compensated to act as supports, respite, and knowledge liaisons to the other foster families, as would be done traditionally, to make a more logical move towards keeping children in their home communities. This is more natural towards the traditional family structure, and these people already have the trust of the community members and can support relaying messages from the social workers, thus removing the need for as frequent intervention from the social workers themselves, which is an action towards rebuilding the whole community. This could not have come without these key informants being active participants in the research and intervention, and this model may serve to address the lack of Indigenous foster homes across Canada. When we consider examples such as the ones I have focused on here, it seems impossible to sit back and observe a problem as an unbiased researcher. We are working with humans, we have the passion for social change, and these methodologies are conducive to do so in a way that ignites the oppressed power that marginalized people, such as the Indigenous people of Canada, do possess. Thank you for your time in listening to my presentation, and here are the references for more information. Good night.